I stood in the pouring rain, watching my career, my reputation, and my life crumble. They framed me, fired me, and laughed. Then, the screech of tires ended it all. But when I opened my eyes, it was 3 weeks earlier. This time, I'm handing them the match. The smell of cheap, burnt office coffee is what brought me back. Not the blinding headlights of the freight truck, not the crushing impact of steel against my ribs, just the acrid, unmistakable scent of the break room's dark roast at Kincaid Enterprises. I gasped, my hand slamming flat onto the cool mahogany of my desk. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, and a cold sweat drenched the collar of my silk blouse. I blinked, the blurry shapes of my office slowly coming into focus. The dual monitors, the stacks of quarterly reconciliation reports, the framed photo of my golden retriever, Barnaby, sitting exactly where it used to be. My fingers dug into the edge of the desk. I checked my phone. The screen lit up. Tuesday, October 12th, 8:14 a.m., a full 3 weeks before my termination. 3 weeks before the day, Gregory Kincaid called me into the glass-walled conference room, flanked by corporate security, and accused me of embezzling $2 million. 3 weeks before I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, blacklisted from the financial sector, and left to wander into the rainy intersection where my life abruptly ended. I wasn't dead. I was back. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my corner office, looking down at the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the broken, weeping woman who had lost everything. It was Chloe Harrison, senior financial controller. The woman who had sacrificed her 20s, her relationships, and her sanity to build Kincaid Enterprises' accounting department from a disorganized mess into a well-oiled machine. A sharp knock at the door shattered the silence. Without waiting for an answer, the heavy oak door swung open. In walked Gregory. He was a man who wore his undeserved wealth like a cheap cologne, flashy, overpowering, and entirely artificial. Behind him, trailing like a shadow steeped in designer perfume, was Serafina Montgomery. In my past life, seeing Serafina in my office had been the beginning of the end. She was 24, armed with an online certificate in business management, and entirely unqualified to balance a checkbook, let alone oversee a corporate ledger. But she was Gregory's new obsession. The rumors of their late-night strategy sessions were an open secret. "Chloe," Gregory said, his tone dripping with that familiar, patronizing warmth. "I know it's early, but I wanted to introduce you to our newest team member. This is Serafina. I've brought her on as the Deputy Director of Finance." I stared at them. The sheer audacity of it still stung. But this time, the sting was completely eclipsed by a sudden, chilling clarity. "Deputy Director," I repeated smoothly, keeping my face entirely neutral. I wasn't aware we had the budget for a new executive role this quarter. Gregory waved a hand dismissively, his Rolex catching the fluorescent light. "Oh, we moved some things around. The board feels we need fresh, innovative perspectives in the finance department. You've been doing things the old-school way for a long time, Chloe. Serafina is here to modernize our workflow. I want you to let her shadow you. Show her the ropes, pass on your daily tasks, and let her take the wheel on the upcoming Q3 closures." In my previous life, I had fought this. I had argued that the Q3 closures were far too complex for a novice. I had spent sleepless nights trying to protect the company's integrity while Serafina actively sabotaged my spreadsheets, deleted crucial macros, and ultimately forged my signature on fraudulent revenue recognition forms to cover up Gregory's offshore skimming. When the internal audit caught the discrepancies, they had an airtight paper trail pointing directly to me. Serafina offered a saccharine smile, her heavily glossed lips curling at the edges. "I'm just so excited to learn from you, Chloe. Gregory has told me everything about your little spreadsheets. I'm hoping we can migrate all of this to a cloud-based AI system I read about. It practically does the work for you." A cloud-based AI system. She was talking about a targeted ad she probably saw on Instagram. I looked at Serafina, taking in her immaculate manicure and the smug, victorious glint in her eyes. Then I looked at Gregory, who was watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to push back, waiting for me to be insubordinate so he could begin building the case against me. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. "You know what, Gregory?" I said, my voice light and agreeable. "You're absolutely right." Gregory blinked. The rehearsed speech he had ready died in his throat. "I am?" "Yes," I nodded, walking back to my desk and shutting down the massive, terrifyingly complex master reconciliation file I had been running. I have been bogged down in the minutiae for far too long. If the board wants a fresh perspective, I think Serafina taking the lead on Q3 is a brilliant idea. In fact, I'll start transitioning my core duties to her immediately. Serafina's smile widened, though a flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. She hadn't expected it to be this easy. "Wow, really? That's so great, Chloe." "Absolutely," I said, pulling out a blank notepad. "I'll clear my calendar. You can have full access to the primary ledger by noon." As they left my office, visibly bewildered but triumphant, I sat back in my leather chair and began to laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound. They wanted my job. They wanted the title, the salary, and the prestige. But what neither Gregory nor Serafina understood was that the job wasn't just looking at numbers. Kincaid Enterprises was a house of cards built over a sinkhole. For 5 years, I had been the structural engineer holding the foundation together with my bare hands. I manually corrected the sales team's duplicate invoices. I caught the shipping department's terrifying miscalculations in customs tariffs. I quietly reallocated funds to cover Gregory's aggressive, often illegal, expense habits before the compliance officers could see them. I didn't just balance the books, I sanitized them. And in exactly 2 weeks, the dreaded federal compliance audit, led by the notoriously ruthless Jonathan Hayes from the Department of Revenue, was scheduled to begin. In my last life, I took the bullet for them. I tried to fix it. This time, I was going to hand them a lit stick of dynamite and wish them a happy 4th of July. The next 7 days were a masterclass in malicious compliance. I played the role of the defeated, burned-out elder millennial to absolute perfection. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp and left exactly at 5 p.m. I stopped answering emails after hours. I stopped my weekend remote sessions. Most importantly, I began the handover process with Serafina. "So, this is the main enterprise software," I explained on Wednesday afternoon, gesturing to the complex dashboard of our ERP system. Serafina was sitting beside me, scrolling through her phone under the desk, barely paying attention. Right, she murmured, stifling a yawn. "And where is the button that generates the P and L statement?" Gregory said. "I just have to export the P and L every Friday for his golf meetings." "It's right here," I said, pointing to the export tab. I didn't tell her that the export button only pulled raw, unadjusted data. I didn't tell her that before hitting that button, she needed to manually run the variance analysis script, reconcile the offshore holding accounts, and scrub the deferred revenue backlog. Without those undocumented, highly specialized steps that lived entirely in my head and my private encrypted macro files, the P and L statement would show millions of dollars in unverified revenue. It would look like massive, brazen tax fraud. "Great," Serafina said, snapping a photo of the screen. "Looks super simple. Honestly, Chloe, I don't know why you made it seem like you were always so busy." "I guess I just wasn't working efficiently," I replied smoothly. I spent my remaining time meticulously documenting everything. I drafted comprehensive handover memos, explicitly detailing that Serafina was assuming complete control and responsibility for the Q3 closure and the impending federal audit. I CC'd Gregory. I CC'd HR. I BCC'd a personal, secure, external server. I had them sign off on the transition timeline. By Friday, the tension in the office had shifted. Gregory was growing impatient. Seeing me happily hand over the reins wasn't enough. He needed me gone entirely so he could install Serafina in my corner office and claim the budget savings from my massive salary. He didn't want to wait 3 weeks. He wanted the execution now. At 3 p.m. on Friday, the phone on my desk rang. It was Patricia Lewis, the Director of Human Resources. "Chloe," Patricia's voice was clipped, entirely devoid of the warmth we usually shared when gossiping by the water cooler. "Can you step into conference room B, please?" "Of course, Patricia. On my way." I stood up, smoothed down the skirt of my navy suit, and grabbed a custom-prepared folder I had kept locked in my bottom drawer. Conference room B was the kill room. It was windowless, positioned near the back elevators, designed for quiet, discreet terminations. When I walked in, Patricia was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by Gregory. Serafina wasn't there. She was likely already measuring my office for velvet drapes. "Have a seat, Chloe," Gregory said, his voice dropping into a faux somber register. I sat down, placing my folder neatly on the table, folding my hands over it. Patricia cleared her throat, pushing a thick stack of papers toward me. "Chloe, we'll get straight to the point. The company is moving in a new direction. With the restructuring of the finance department, your role as senior financial controller has been deemed redundant. Effective immediately, we are terminating your employment." I stared at the paperwork. In my past life, this was the moment the world had ended. This was when they had slapped the fabricated embezzlement charges on the table, threatening me with prison if I didn't walk away quietly and take the blame for the missing funds. But because I had accelerated the timeline and completely disarmed them by playing dumb, they didn't have time to frame me. They were just firing me without cause to make room for his mistress. "Redundant," I said softly, tasting the word. "I see." "We appreciate your years of service," Gregory interjected quickly, a vicious, triumphant light in his eyes. "But frankly, Chloe, you've become a bottleneck. Serafina has already identified dozens of outdated processes in just a few days. We need agility." "Agility," I nodded in agreement. "Of course, the Q3 audit begins in 10 days, Gregory. You're comfortable with Serafina leading that?" "More than comfortable," Gregory scoffed. "She's already prepared the preliminary reports. It's a simple push-button operation. You overcomplicated things to justify your salary. We're offering you a standard 2-week severance package, provided you sign this non-disclosure agreement." I finally looked down at the paper. 2 weeks after 5 years of 8 zero-hour work weeks, saving him from federal indictments on a quarterly basis. I slowly opened my own folder and slid a different document across the table. "I won't be signing that, Patricia," I said calmly. "However, I will sign a comprehensive NDA regarding Gregory's personal expense accounts, the discrepancies in the Cayman's holding shell, and the irregular vendor payments to a Montgomery Consulting, which, coincidentally, was registered under Serafina's name 6 months ago." Gregory's face went chalk white. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might pass out. Patricia gasped, her head snapping toward her CEO in shock. "What? What is this?" Gregory stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. "This is my severance counteroffer," I replied, tapping the document. "I want 6 months of full pay. I want my unvested stock options accelerated and paid out immediately. I want a glowing letter of recommendation signed by you today. And I want an ironclad release from any liability regarding the financial state of this company from the moment I walk out that door." "That's extortion," Gregory hissed, leaning forward. "It's a negotiation," I corrected gently. "You want me gone so you can play house in the executive suite. I want to leave. But if I walk out of here with your insulting 2-week offer, I will immediately forward this dossier to the SEC, the IRS, and the board of directors, including your father-in-law, who still holds a 40% stake in this firm." Silence descended on the room. It was thick, heavy, and absolutely delicious. Gregory stared at me, seeing me for the first time not as his loyal workhorse, but as the predator I had been forced to become. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing dangerously in his temple. He looked at Patricia, who immediately looked away, terrified of being implicated. He snatched my contract, read through the liability release, and grabbed a pen. He signed it so hard the paper tore. "You're a sociopath," he spat, tossing the pen across the table. "I'm redundant," I smiled, collecting the papers. "And as of right now, I'm unemployed." 30 minutes later, I walked out of Kincaid Enterprises with a cardboard box holding my dog's photo, my favorite mug, and a severance check that would comfortably float me for 2 years. As I walked past my old office, I saw Serafina sitting in my chair, spinning a gold pen, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She looked up and gave me a little mocking wave. I smiled back, a genuine radiant smile, and gave her a slight nod. "Good luck, Serafina," I thought. "You're going to need a miracle." The Q3 federal audit by Jonathan Hayes was set to begin a week from Monday, and I had just removed the only firewall keeping Kincaid Enterprises from burning to the ground. I spent the first Monday of my newfound freedom at a high-end cafe in the Gold Coast district, sipping an overpriced matcha latte and watching the rain streak the windows. My phone sat quietly on the table, save for the occasional ping from a group chat. I didn't need to be in the office to know exactly how the morning was unfolding. I had a mole. Daniel Collins was a junior accountant I had hired straight out of DePaul University 2 years ago. He was brilliant, socially anxious, and fiercely loyal to me because I was the only manager who had ever shielded him from Gregory's toxic tirades. Before I left, I had given Daniel one specific instruction. Keep your head down. Do exactly what Serafina tells you, and text me everything. At 9:15 a.m., the first message arrived. "Daniel, Hayes is here. He brought 3 junior auditors with him. They look like they haven't smiled since 2018. Jonathan Hayes was a legend at the Department of Revenue. He was a meticulous, humorless man who viewed corporate ledgers not as numbers, but as crime scenes waiting to be processed. "Daniel, Serafina just took them into the glass conference room. She offered them artisanal kombucha. Hayes asked for the Q1 and Q2 master reconciliation files." I smiled, taking a sip of my latte. I could picture it perfectly. Serafina had no idea what a master reconciliation file was. To her, finance was a series of neat little bar graphs she could drop into a PowerPoint to make Gregory nod approvingly. The actual machinery, the brutal line-by-line matching of bank statements to general ledger entries, the adjusting journal entries for depreciation, the accrual reversals was a foreign language. By Tuesday afternoon, the mood in the Kincaid Enterprises finance department had shifted from tense to apocalyptic. "Daniel." Code red. Hayes asked Serafina to pull the raw P and L from the ERP system while he watched. She clicked the export button you showed her. My heart did a pleasant little flutter. The raw export. The one that hadn't been scrubbed by my custom variant scripts. The one that included all of Gregory's duplicate invoices and offshore transfers, sitting out in the open like a rotting carcass in a pristine living room. "Daniel." Hayes just stopped the meeting. He asked Serafina why there is a $2.4 million discrepancy between the raw system revenue and our filed tax returns. She told him it was probably a software glitch and said she'd have IT look at it. I laughed out loud, drawing a strange look from the barista. A software glitch. You could almost admire her audacity if it wasn't so aggressively stupid. You do not tell a federal auditor that $2 million vanished into the digital ether. Wednesday was the day the house of cards collapsed entirely. I was at the dog park with Barnaby when my phone began to vibrate violently. It wasn't a text this time. It was Daniel calling. I answered, hearing the chaotic hum of the office in the background. Someone was shouting. "Chloe," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. "It's over. It's all over." "Deep breaths, Daniel. Talk to me. What happened?" "Hayes didn't just look at the revenue gap," Daniel said rapidly. "He started pulling vendor payment histories to trace the missing money. He found Montgomery Consulting." I stopped walking, and he asked Serafina to provide the vendor onboarding documents and the statements of work for the consulting fees. She completely panicked. She started crying, Chloe, actual tears. She told Hayes that Gregory approved all the payments and that she was just the deputy director following orders. She threw him under the bus, I mused. It was faster than I anticipated. I thought they would at least try to present a united front for a week. It gets worse, Daniel continued, his voice dropping to a barely audible rasp. Hayes pulled the corporate registration for Montgomery Consulting. He saw her name on the LLC. He realized Kincaid Enterprises has been paying the deputy director of finance $500,000 a year in unverified consulting fees. Hayes just walked out of the conference room and told the receptionist to lock the doors. He's freezing the company's bank accounts pending a full federal fraud investigation. I looked down at Barnaby, who was happily chewing on a tennis ball. The rain had stopped, and the sun was just beginning to break through the gray Chicago clouds. "Daniel," I said softly, "pack up your personal belongings. Don't touch any company files. Go home. You're going to be fine." "What about Gregory?" "Gregory is about to learn that actions have consequences," I replied. I hung up the phone. 3 days. Serafina Montgomery, the supposed modernizer of the Kincaid Finance Department, had lasted exactly 72 hours before triggering a catastrophic federal lockdown. The phone call I had been waiting for came at 11:45 p.m. on Thursday night. The caller ID simply read, "Gregory Kincaid." I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the rhythmic buzzing against my nightstand, before finally swiping to answer. "Hello?" I said, injecting just enough sleepy confusion into my voice to be insulting. "Chloe." Gregory's voice was unrecognizable. The booming, arrogant baritone that usually echoed through the executive suites was gone, replaced by a frantic, breathless wheeze. He sounded like a man drowning in a teacup. "Chloe, you have to help me." "Gregory, it's nearly midnight. I don't work for you anymore, remember? I was deemed redundant." "Stop playing games!" he snapped, a brief flash of his old temper surfacing before immediately sinking back into desperation. "They froze the accounts, Chloe. Hayes brought in the FBI this afternoon. They seized my hard drives. They took Serafina's phone." "That sounds like a serious internal issue," I replied, leaning back against my pillows. "How is Serafina handling the Q3 closures?" "She's a complete idiot!" Gregory screamed into the receiver. "She doesn't know anything." She handed them the raw ledger. "Chloe, everything is there. The Cayman's account, the Montgomery payments, the inflated Q2 revenues. Why didn't you hide it? Why didn't you run the scripts before you left?" "Because that would be fraud, Gregory," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising calm. "I handed over the system exactly as it operates. If you and your deputy director were running illicit shell companies through the primary ledger, that's hardly my responsibility." Silence hung heavily on the line, broken only by his ragged breathing. "I'll double your salary," he whispered, the fight completely draining out of him. "I'll triple it. $1 million a year, Chloe, plus a signing bonus. Just come back in tomorrow. Tell Hayes you made a mistake during the handover. Tell him you accidentally uploaded a test environment ledger. You can fix this. You've always fixed this." In my past life, this was the exact moment I had caved. I had been so conditioned to seek his approval, so terrified of the corporate machine, that I had stayed up for 3 days straight forging documents to save him. And my reward had been a frame-up and a termination. "Gregory, do you remember the severance agreement you signed?" I asked pleasantly. "What?" "Yes, the extortion paperwork. What about it?" Section 4, Paragraph B. "The company, its officers, and its board of directors hereby release Chloe Harrison from any and all civil, criminal, or fiduciary liability regarding the financial operations of Kincaid Enterprises, acknowledging she acted strictly within legal parameters during her tenure." "You signed it. Patricia witnessed it." "That piece of paper won't save you when I tell them you orchestrated the whole thing," he snarled, finally resorting to his favorite tactic, threats. "Actually, it will," I countered smoothly, because alongside that contract, I submitted a 400-page encrypted dossier to the SEC on the day you fired me. It details every single unauthorized transfer you forced me to execute, complete with your digital signature and audio recordings of your strategy meetings. I was granted federal whistleblower immunity on Monday morning. I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a sound that was half sob, half choke. "Oh, and Gregory?" I added softly. "I also sent a copy of the Montgomery Consulting LLC registration to your father-in-law, Richard Sterling. I figured the board and your wife deserved transparency." The line went dead. The fallout was swift, brutal, and thoroughly publicized. By Friday morning, Kincaid Enterprises was front-page news on the Wall Street Journal. CEO ousted in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scandal. Richard Sterling, absolutely furious that his son-in-law had been stealing family money to fund an affair with a 24-year-old fake consultant, didn't just fire Gregory. He systematically destroyed him. The board filed an emergency injunction to seize Gregory's personal assets, including the penthouse and the fleet of sports cars. Serafina, realizing the immense danger she was in, immediately turned state's evidence. She claimed Gregory had manipulated her, that she was just a naive girl who didn't understand what she was signing. It didn't save her from the fraud charges, but it guaranteed that Gregory would be facing a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. They turned on each other like starved animals in a cage. A month later, I was sitting in my newly leased, sun-drenched office overlooking the Chicago River. I had taken my generous severance package and the massive whistleblower bounty from the SEC and opened my own boutique financial forensics firm. My first major client? Richard Sterling, who hired me at an exorbitant hourly rate to salvage whatever legitimate assets remained of Kincaid Enterprises. I looked at the framed photo of Barnaby on my desk. Beside it sat a small, polished wooden plaque with my new title, Chloe Harrison, founder and CEO. They thought they could break me. They thought they could use me, discard me, and leave me to take the fall for their greed. But rebirth is a funny thing. It doesn't just give you a second chance. It gives you the absolute clarity to see exactly where to place the knife. I didn't just survive the crash. I built a new empire from their ashes. If Chloe's ultimate revenge story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic boss or a useless coworker? Tell me your wildest workplace drama in the comments below. Don't forget to share this stuff and subscribe for more jaw-dropping, real-life vindication tales. Hit the bell so you never miss an update.